So before I go over the content of my essays, I just wanted to mention that although I applied as a US citizen, I strongly identified as a Bangladeshi in all my essays and all, because that is truly the nationality that I choose to identify as. In terms of my essays, altogether, I submitted 3 to Penn, 1 Common App essay and 2 supplemental essays. Out of the many Common App prompts that were available, the prompt that I chose to answer was, reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? In this essay, what I talked about was my relationship with Islam, because I come from one of the largest Muslim countries in the world, and from the time I was a child, I was always taught that a part of the Muslim culture is to love and forgive unconditionally, and that is what I grew up believing. However, when I started growing up, entering around the 10th grade, I started to hear things from my different acquaintances and relatives about how LGBTQ people and people who marry outside of their religion should be stoned for doing so or being themselves. So I started to question whether one should truly blindly believe in religion and what really was meant by love when people talked about it in the Islamic sense. So all of this kind of precipitated this complicated relationship with religion that I still continue to navigate. I think the important thing about this essay was that I kind of displayed a lot of vulnerability and personal growth, which I do believe helped make it a good essay. Something that's really important is that you exactly answer whatever the prompt is asking you for. So the prompt asked me to kind of talk about this time when I questioned my belief, and what prompted it, I said I questioned my Islamic beliefs, and what prompted it was what I was hearing from relatives and people about what their perceptions of Islam was. And then it also asked what was the outcome. The outcome was that it kind of precipitated a very complicated journey in terms of spirituality. The first supplemental essay that I answered was, how did you discover your intellectual and academic interests, and how will you explore them at the University of Pennsylvania? Please respond considering the specific undergraduate school that you have selected. So for this essay, I really made sure to emphasize my interest in history at the College of Arts and Sciences. I started by talking about how a book gifted to me by my grandfather on my birthday was what really started my endeavor into the field of history, because I was reading about different empires and civilizations. I then followed up by talking about how I explore these interests at school. And the following part was the most important, and it was how I intended on exploring my interests at the college. And for this, I recommend that you do a lot of research on the different opportunities available, because it's really important that Penn knows that you're committed to this, that you're really putting in time and effort to know what you want to get from Penn. I talked about the different funds and grants for history research, as well as the undergraduate research journal, the Penn History Review, so I really showed in my essay that I had done my research. The second prompt that I had to answer was, at Penn, learning and growth happen outside of the classroom too. How will you explore the community at Penn? Consider how this community will help shape your perspective and identity, and how your identity and perspective will help shape this. This was a 200 words maximum essay, so I had to be really concise. The activity that I talked about was the Penn student government, because while in high school I was actually actively involved with the student government, which we called the Student Council. I mentioned that PSG, which is the acronym for Penn Student Government, would help me develop my identity as a leader and change maker, which I desired, and in turn I would contribute my drive and my desire to guide people through leadership to this group. I think with both supplemental essays, what was really important was to, 1, show that I really did my research, 2, show them how they would be helping me achieve my goals. I think this was important particularly because the universities already know why they do or don't want us as applicants, but they also need to know that we're truly interested in them and that we know of what we want from them. and we're willing to employ the many resources that they have available to achieve our goals and make change in this world. I also know a lot of people choose to do consulting for essays, but the most consulting I did was have my college counselor and a classmate help me edit my essays. Some of the online resources that are actually free that I used, however, were the essay writing guidelines on the Prep Scholar website and the College Find blog, which had these posts that dissected the essay prompts for Penn and many other schools and gave suggestions on what to focus on for free, and this was specialized for every single school. For the recommendation letters, I had two from the teachers that I had been building a close kind of mentor relationship with over the course of 2 years when I was in the IB, and even before that for one teacher. They were my economics and history teacher. I think when you're choosing for whom to ask for these, it's really important to consider which teachers have seen your best work ethic and really think positive of you. These were teachers who had recognized me for my work over the course of the years I had them and were teaching the classes which were my strong suit. Furthermore, these were social sciences teachers, and I was applying for a history major, so they would be able to attest to my analytical abilities. So I know a lot of people fret over giving interviews and getting interviews, performing well on them, but I just want to say that I did not get an interview from Penn, although some of my other peers who applied did. Penn does offer interviews to most of its applicants, but not all of them. So if you're applying there and you don't get an email about an interview, don't think that you're doing something wrong or your application will be negatively affected, or they think that you don't deserve an interview. And if you do get an interview, I highly suggest that you check out some of the really useful advice that websites like, again, Prep Scholar and College Find have, because I had used that advice for an interview for another school and it had gone pretty well, actually. It included things like preparing for certain questions, knowing the university really well, and most importantly, knowing what you wanted from the university. But for a lot of international applicants, things like availability of alumni might become an issue, as it did for me in the case of some of my universities. So again, don't freak out if you don't get an email about interviews. So lastly, let's talk a bit about my extracurricular activities, which I think were honestly one of the most important parts of my application, as I was heavily involved in many. I'm just going to go about them in the same order as I did on my Common App, which was in order of importance to me. The first activity that I put down, and which was truly the most important to me, was the student government/council. Out of my 4 years in high school, I was heavily involved with the council for 3 years and played an active leadership role, so much so that I became executive council president, which is the highest office of the school, and throughout my council career, I raised up to $9,000. So my leadership character was really highlighted. The next extracurricular that I listed was the National Honor Society, which is kind of more something that schools based on American educational principles partake in. To join the NHS, you have to show leadership, scholarship, character, and service. As a part of the NHS, I was involved in organizing and hosting TEDx events, so again, it showed that I was taking initiative. The third activity I listed was the South Asian Club, which was something that I held very dear to me, as it was a celebration of the culture I so strongly identified with, and I eventually became a leader of this club, thus contributing to and organizing various cultural shows and fairs in my time at the club. The next activity I listed was community service oriented, and it was my time as member and leader of the Bright Stars School, which was basically a club that worked with the children of a local slum school. The fifth activity that I listed was very career oriented, and it was the business that I helped co-found with a friend of mine. It's basically an online patisserie based in Dhaka, and I was in charge of handling the page for this and helping with business dealings. This was something that was not affiliated with my school. The next activity that I listed was Model UN, which I was part of for 3 years while in high school, and I had also gone to conferences abroad as a part of the MUN team. Following that, I listed that I had also done an internship at an economic think tank called the Policy Research Institute, and this was an extension of what I was learning in class, but it was not affiliated with the school. It was something I was doing on my own time while I was in school. The next thing I also listed was an internship I had done, which was at my school at the 2nd grade class, where I was a teacher's assistant. Lastly, an extracurricular that I had listed, which I did not hold as dear to me as the ones I listed before, but still considered important, was the peer facilitators, which is a group that helped build a positive atmosphere within the school through different events and activities. So, a few things about my extracurriculars. Although I wasn't a part of athletics, almost all of the activities that I listed showed that I knew how to take initiative and I stepped up to leadership roles, which was super important in establishing my own character. None of my activities were really related to the major I applied for, and that's still okay because I showed that I put a lot of emphasis on leadership opportunities outside of the classroom. And I wasn't exactly an all-rounder, but I was a leader, and that was kind of my application spike. So that's all I have to say about my application journey as an international applicant. I hope the information I gave you today will be helpful wherever you choose to apply, whether it be UPenn or another school. I wish you the best of luck.